There comes a moment in a man's life where the picture in his head starts cracking. Not because he's weaker or he stopped caring, but because somewhere along his journey he started realizing that maybe the life that he wanted might not be the life that he needs. And that is a hard, very difficult thing to admit because people don't just build goals, they build identities around those. They build the futures around those goals. They build their own pride around the goals. They build their image around them. They build proof around them. They say, this is where I'm going, this is who I'm becoming, this is the life that I'm building. And after enough time, that picture stops feeling like a possibility. It starts feeling more locked in. So when life starts pulling on that, when your spirit starts resisting it, when your heart and your brain starts telling you, this might not be it anymore, it feels super personal. It feels like failure, like wasting time, looking stupid, like becoming the guy who talks big and pivots again, like someone who can't stick, someone who doesn't know himself. But I think that's where a lot of people misunderstand this whole part of life, because not every dream dies because you failed. Some dreams die because they were only meant to carry you to a certain point. Okay, some visions were never meant to be your final home. Some pictures were only there to kind of get you moving, right? To get you out of one season or through one chapter, to wake something up in you, to show you what you value, to show you what you don't value, right? To teach you the difference between what looks good from a distance and what actually fits you when you get close enough to it. And that's a super brutal realization, because now the question is no longer, can I get the life that I wanted? Now the question becomes, what do I do if the life I wanted is no longer the life that feels true? So let's talk about it. Excuse me for my my stuffy nose, because I'm a little bit congested right now. But I want to talk about the grief of realizing that the life that you once wanted so badly might not actually be the life that your soul needs right now, because that grief is real. Okay, that confusion and that guilt, that shake on your identity is real. And if you don't understand what's happening inside you, you're going to keep trying to force yourself into futures that no longer fit you. And it's just because you're too afraid to look inconsistent walking away from them. And that's how people trap themselves. And it's not always in a bad life. Sometimes people do it into impressive ones, right? Sometimes in lives that look right from the outside, but they feel super dead the closer that you get to them. So if you've been, in that space lately where something that you used to want doesn't hit you the same way, where the dream that you have still looks good, but it doesn't feel true to you, where, part of you is scared to let it go because you've already built so much of yourself around it, this is for you, okay? Because sometimes the hardest thing in life is not failing to reach the dream. Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting the dream was never fully yours to begin with. Okay, and that's the part that people don't know how to talk about. Because when a dream or a goal or a vision that you had for your life stops fitting you, everyone wants to simplify it. Okay, they want to call it a redirection or like a lesson, maybe maturity. They want to package it up into some clean little sentence so it doesn't feel as heavy as it really is. But some things don't deserve to be rushed into that. They need to be almost grieved, because if you really gave your heart to a version of life, if you really saw yourself there, if you really built emotion around it, if you really let yourself believe that where all this was going, you know what I mean? Then losing that picture, it's not a small thing. Even if it wasn't right for you, even if it wouldn't, would have broke you later, or even if it only looked good because you hadn't lived inside of it yet and the weight that it carries, right? It was still real to you, and that matters. I think people forget that. They act like just because something no longer fits, it must, not have meant anything. Like just because you outgrew it, or you don't align with it anymore, that you should be able to drop it cleanly. But that's not how, the human heart works, right? The heart doesn't care whether the dream was efficient. It cares that it was felt. And it cares that you saw yourself there, and you built hope there. And it cares that some version of your soul moved toward that image and said, yeah, that's it. That's where I'm going. That's what I'm building. That's what all this is for. And once that happens, the dream stops being theoretical. It becomes your emotional reality. Even if your body never fully lived it, your spirit already touched it. That's why losing an old future can hurt, almost like losing something that physically happened, because in like kind of in a way it did. It happened, right? It happened inside you. You pictured the place, the mornings, the life, the person, the who you would be inside that life. You emotionally moved into a house that your reality never fully constructed. And when life starts telling you that that vision isn't going to be your home, or maybe it was never supposed to be your home, you don't just walk away. You know, something in you breaks. You stand there for a second. And not because life is unfair, right? But because that image had already become part of your identity. And now if you let it go, it feels like you're not just losing the future, right? You're not just losing what you had pictured in your mind for that future. You're losing the version of you. Okay, you're grieving yourself. The self that was going to make it work or prove something, or make all the earlier confusion and work make sense. And let me say this clearly, because I think a lot of people need to hear it. Just because a dream was not right for you forever does not mean that it was fake, and that's important. Okay, it doesn't mean that you were foolish for feeling it or that you were weak for wanting it. It doesn't mean you were confused just because life eventually revealed something deeper. Okay, because maybe, just maybe, consider that dream served a purpose. Okay, maybe it got you moving. Maybe it, showed you a different perspective, showed you what you value, grew you with different traits, showed you what kind of, I don't know, things that you were chasing, what kind of life impressed you, what kind of, what parts of you are still hungry for belonging, image, self-discovery itself. Maybe the dream was not there to be lived forever. Maybe it was there to expose you to yourself. Okay, that's not nothing. That's sacred work, and you don't value it as much. People don't like sacred work when it hurts. They like the idea of things when it's exciting, right? When it flatters them, when it makes them feel chosen, right? Imagining that future. But the moment that it starts taking things away, the moment that, it starts asking for you to, I don't know, surrender different things, right? Or it starts looking a little different than the one that they pictured or announced to people. Now the ego gets involved, right? Now pride gets involved. Now image gets involved. Now your fear starts talking, right? What are people going to think? How do I explain this? How do I change without looking lost or pivot? How do I let go without feeling like I failed myself or let people down or betrayed myself, right? That's where people get trapped. Not always because they still love the dream either, right? Sometimes because they already told the world that they did. And that's dangerous. Because once you start living for the consistency of image instead of consistency of truth, you're going to stay in futures that no longer fit yourself just to avoid the embarrassment of evolution itself. Okay, people will stay in the wrong life to avoid looking like the kind of person who changed. And that's one of the saddest trades that a person can make, right? To hold on to a future that's starving them just because they once said it out loud with, I don't know, super loud conviction. And I understand why, because that feels powerful. It feels strong. It feels like direction. But there's a difference between being convicted and being trapped. And a man should be strong enough to commit, but he should also be honest enough to recognize when what he committed to was an earlier version of himself. Because that's not weakness. Okay? Sometimes the strongest thing that you can do is look at the life that you once wanted or dreamed about, and then look at the version of yourself that built it and say, that was real. That mattered. That helped me during that season of my life, but it's not where I am being called now, and that takes more courage than people think. Anybody can keep marching in the wrong direction out of pride, right? Anybody can keep repeating old plans because they're scared of what change will do to them or what it says about them, right? But it takes a different kind of person, a different kind of man, a different kind of woman to stand in front of a future that they once worshipped and admit, this doesn't fit me anymore. This doesn't fit my soul anymore. Okay? Grief is the price a lot of people refuse to pay. Because grief, it means letting reality win over any fantasies that you have, right? Burying your self-image, watching a beautiful idea lose power over you. Okay? Grief means standing there without, the map that you once had and saying, I don't fully know what comes next, but I know I cannot keep calling this home. Okay? That's an honest sentence. And honesty like that will save your life. Because the life that you need, it won't always flatter you first. It's not always going to look as impressive at the beginning. It's not going to come with the, same clean story that you tell yourself, or it won't be the one that you rehearsed, or it may not be the one that everybody, nods and looks at you and says, yeah, that makes sense for you. Sometimes the life that you need arrives as more of like a contradiction, okay? It's more of an uncomfortable truth that what used to excite you now leaves you a little bit less excited and cold, right? And if you're brave enough to admit that, if you're brave enough to stop forcing energy where your spirit and yourself and your own intuition no longer agrees, then maybe you give yourself a chance to find something deeper than the life that you originally wanted. Okay? Not one that is, shinier in all ways, but it's more true to you, and that's worth grieving for. Right? But this is where some danger can come in, because some lives look incredible from the outside. They make sense on paper, right? They look good in photos. They sound good when you say them out loud. They give you an identity people instantly respect, right? They give you a sentence that you can hand to people and nobody will ask too many questions. And that's why so many people get trapped, because a life that looks good can trap you before you even ask the harder question, right? Does it feel true? Okay, not exciting or, looking impressive, or will it be admired by other people? No, true. Because a life that looks good usually shows you the outcome first. It shows you the image, right? The place, the business, the city, the title, the version of yourself on the other side of it all, looking good and clear and who made sense. That's what makes it so attractive, right? It introduces itself through the reward, okay, not the weight. It doesn't show you the boredom, the pressure, the arguments, the misalignment. It doesn't show you what your nervous system would feel like inside that life on a random day when no one's watching and the image isn't enough to carry you. Okay, that's the problem with a life that only looks good. Human beings are very easy to almost seduce with futures that are edited, okay? Because that's what happens with a life that only looks good. It's edited before you even arrive, right? The mind loves completion. It loves clean pictures. It loves stories that tie everything together, right? A version of life where all the chaos in you finally gets justified by the outcome. It loves to imagine that, right? But a life that feels true, that's different, okay? A life that feels true does not only seduce your ego, okay? It can hold your reality, and that matters because there are futures that can't hold your actual soul, but will flatter your image, right? There are lives that make you look like you're winning, and they privately starve you, right? There are relationships that, they look beautiful from far away, but they don't fit the truth of who you're becoming, right? There are dreams that once feel electric and now only survive because your pride is keeping them intact, and that's why this distinction matters so much. A life that looks good asks, how do I look in this? What does this say about me? Does this make me feel significant? But a life that feels true, it asks, can I keep growing here, right? Can the real me live inside this without having to perform every day, right? It's such a more grown perspective, because the real test of a life is not whether it impresses you from a distance, but rather can it hold you when the emotion settles and the image wears off and all that's left is the truth. Okay, that's where it shows up. Right? Can you still respect this life when it's ordinary? Can you still choose it when it's repetitive? Can you still feel good about it when no one's applauding you? Right? That's how you know, because real life is lived in repetitions. Morning by morning, day by day, decision by decision. And a lot of people never ask themselves if the life that they say they want can actually survive ordinary reality. They only ask if it feels good in imagination. That's why they keep chasing things that impress them instead of things that, nourish them. Being impressed makes you feel closer to an identity, but nourished, that makes you feel close to yourself, and that's a huge difference. I think some people know this deep down, but they don't want to admit it because the lives that impress us are often tied to old wounds, right? To finally being enough, proving something, being chosen, being admired, becoming the version of ourselves we thought that would take away the insecurity. So when that kind of life stops fitting, it feels like more than just like a pivot. And that's why people cling to it. Not because it's feeding them, right? Because it's glamoring their pain. Pain will dress itself up as ambition or certainty, as loyalty to the plan, right? As people saying things like, I can't quit, I just need to stay consistent now, this is what I said I was going to do. Meanwhile, the deeper truth is standing right there in front of them saying, this doesn't feel alive anymore, this doesn't feel honest, it may still look good, but it's not feeding me anymore. And that's the voice people ignore because it's not loud enough to compete with your ego at first. Because ego is super loud. That's why you have to get quiet enough to hear it, right? And once you do hear it, you realize something that changes everything. A life can be beautiful and it still doesn't have to be yours, okay? Things can be attractive and emotionally vivid, still not be aligned or true to you. A path can make sense to everyone around you and still be the wrong place for you to live, okay? That's discernment itself, right? Discernment is painful. It takes away the romance of the picture and it replaces it with that hard responsibility, with the truth of what that actually implies for your life. Now you can't just ask what you want. You have to actually ask what can hold the deepest parts of you without making you disappear or crumble. If you don't learn the difference between a life that looks good and a life that feels true to yourself, you're going to spend years building a life that flatters your self-concept while you're starving your actual soul of what you actually need. And that trade right there is way too expensive. Sometimes the life that you need only starts becoming visible after you bury the one that no longer fits. And burial isn't failure. Okay? You bury what mattered, what carried you, right? It's respect. You bury it because you refuse to drag its dead weight through the rest of your life pretending that it's still a truth, a living truth, right? That's not weakness. That's a man, a human being finally becoming honest enough to stop confusing attachment with alignment. And once you understand that, you start seeing why this kind of pain is so deep. Okay, it's not just that you lost the old vision. It's that you have to meet yourself again without it. And that's one of the hardest things a person will ever do, right? So maybe, that's the real heartbreak in all this. Not that you lost the life that you wanted, but that you have to become honest enough to admit it may not been, or it may not have been the life that you needed. And that is a painful kind of honesty because it doesn't just ask you to release the goal. It asks you to release the world that you built around that, right? The certainty that you had, the picture that you had in your head, the version of you that used to feel clear when you imagined, yourself in that environment. And that's why it feels heavier than people understand because it's spiritual. It's not just practical. You're loosening your grip on a future that once gave your life shape. And when that shape disappears, there's a certain stretch of time where everything feels exposed. You don't have the old stuff. You just have truth, and that can feel bare. And that's the season a lot of people are in when they think they're lost. They're not always lost. Sometimes they're standing in the sacred space between an old life that no longer fits and a new life that they have not fully met yet. And that space is humbling. Man, it can make you feel foolish and behind. It's just uncomfortable, but maybe what's really happening is simpler and deeper than that. Maybe you're not betraying yourself. Maybe instead you're finally refusing to betray yourself. That's different. Because there's a version of self-betrayal that looks very disciplined. Like, staying on the course and consistency. But inside, it's dead. Inside, it's a person, a man, a woman forcing themselves to keep living inside of something that yourself and that you no longer agree with. Just because you're scared of letting go and what that will say about them. I don't think that's strength. I think real strength is being able to feel the grief without running back into that lie, right? To feel the loss without reviving the wrong dream just because it's familiar, right? To feel emptiness without filling it with old images. That's the kind of strength that changes a person, because now you're making room for what's true for you. And it doesn't look good at first. It looks like silence or admitting you don't know anything yet, right? Grieving your future and still moving forward with nothing in your hands. Okay? Having nothing is not always a curse. Sometimes it's that first sign that you stopped clinging to what was never yours in the first place. The life that you need will not always arrive looking better than the life that you wanted. And that's the point that people miss, right? At least not first. At first, it may just feel a little bit more honest, more breathable, less performative, less dependent on proving anything, less dependent on becoming a version of yourself that only made sense inside of whatever picture that you had for yourself. The life that you need may not impress you that the way the old one did, right away. But it will let the real you breathe. And maybe that's worth more than the picture ever was. Because what's the point, in my opinion, what's the point of building a beautiful life that your soul can't live inside, right? What's the point of reaching a future that looks incredible from the outside if, when you finally get there, the deepest part of you still feels like it's trapped or like it's a stranger in a room? It's too expensive, okay? Too expensive to your own true self. So maybe this is what I'm going to leave you with. If there is a life that you once wanted and something in you knows that it no longer fits the same way, do not rush to call yourself weak. Okay? Don't rush to call yourself fake or failure just because it changed. I just want you to sit with it. Respect it enough to, admit what it gave you and grieve it and tell the truth about what it no longer is. And then let yourself consider something most people are too proud to consider. Maybe losing that life is how you find your own. Okay? Maybe the death of the old picture is life clearing the room for the future. Maybe what feels like confusion is actually the beginning of honesty. Right? Maybe what feels like losing yourself is the first moment that you stop building your future around anybody else's perception or maybe an old image and start building it around something real. And if that's where you are right now in that in between where your old life no longer fits and the new one's still unformed, you're not broken, you're not behind, you're not foolish because the dream has changed or your vision has altered a little bit. You're just being asked a harder question. Not what impresses you or makes the best story or makes your ego feel good, but what life is true enough for your soul to live in. That's the question. And it may cost you the picture. It may cost you the old version of yourself that you thought you would be. But if it gives you back your honesty and your peace and your, a life that actually fits who you are and who you're becoming, then maybe the life that you lost wasn't your tragedy. Maybe it was just the release that you needed. So, yeah. Thank you for listening to episode 28 of the Self-Discovery Files. If you haven't followed me on my socials, follow me at the Dylan Phipps on TikTok and Instagram. We're posting on TikTok, every single day. If you haven't followed the podcast, follow on whatever platform you are on. You'll get notifications every single Monday at 12 Eastern when we upload a new episode. And yeah, we'll see you next week for episode 29.